Montana Territory, 1872. The sun hung low over the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the rugged landscape in shades of amber and gold. A cold wind whistled through the pines, carrying the promise of an early winter as Finnegan Young guided his horse along the narrow mountain trail. At 25, he'd already lived a lifetime on the frontier, orphaned at 14, riding with cattle drives by 16, and now working as a hired gun for the Northern Pacific Railroad survey teams. His Colt revolver hung heavy on his hip, a constant reminder of the violence that had shaped him. Finn, as most called him, had the kind of handsome face that made saloon girls offer free drinks, with clear blue eyes that belied the coldness he'd cultivated within. His sandy blonde hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and though he kept himself cleaner than most frontier men, the light stubble on his jaw gave away weeks of wilderness travel. Lean and broad-shouldered from years of hard riding, he moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to violence. "No point in getting attached to anything out here," he muttered to his horse, a dappled gray he called Shadow. "Or anyone." The horse snorted in response, steam rising from its nostrils in the crisp autumn air. Finn believed this truth with bone-deep certainty. The Montana Territory took everything you loved eventually. His parents to typhoid, his older brother to a Blackfoot raid, his first mentor to a barroom brawl over a card game. The frontier was no place for softness. A man survived by staying hard, staying alone, and staying ready. Love was a luxury that got men killed in a land where winter storms, hostile tribes, and outlaw gangs waited around every bend. What he wanted was simple enough: earn enough money guarding the survey team to buy a small ranch in the Gallatin Valley, somewhere he could live in solitude with good grazing land and natural boundaries to keep the world at bay. He'd seen enough of humanity to know that survival meant isolation. As the trail widened into a valley, Finn spotted the thin plume of smoke rising from a small homestead in the distance. The survey team's maps showed this valley as uninhabited, another government mistake that could cost lives. His job was to scout ahead, identify potential threats, and report back. He hadn't expected to find settlers this far into the mountains. Approaching cautiously, Finn noted the neat log cabin with chinked walls, a small corral holding 2 horses, and a carefully tended garden plot, signs of permanent settlement rather than a trapper's temporary camp. Most surprising was the colorful quilt hanging on a line, bright patches of red and yellow fluttering in the wind like a signal flag. The cabin door swung open suddenly, and Finn's hand instinctively dropped to his revolver. "If you're planning to use that, I'd appreciate you waiting until I've finished hanging these linens," called a clear, feminine voice. Laundry's hard enough work without bloodstains to scrub out. Finn blinked in surprise as a young woman stepped into view, a basket balanced on her hip. She couldn't have been more than 22, with waves of rich chestnut hair cascading over her shoulders. Her blue calico dress was simple but clean, cinched at a narrow waist with a white apron tied over it. Despite the frontier isolation, there was nothing rough about her appearance. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the wilderness. "Ma'am," Finn touched the brim of his hat, regaining his composure. "I'm with the Northern Pacific Survey. Didn't expect to find anyone living out here." "Julia Green," she replied, setting down her basket and regarding him with intelligent hazel eyes. "And this is Green Valley. At least that's what my father called it before he passed last winter." "You're here alone?" Finn couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. A flash of annoyance crossed her features. "I managed just fine, Mr. Young." "Finnegan Young." "Well, Mr. Young, I've survived a Montana winter on my own, which I suspect is more than some of your railroad men could claim." She turned back to her laundry, effectively dismissing him. Finn sat uncomfortably in his saddle. Protocol dictated he should warn her about the railroad's plans, about the survey crew and workers who would soon flood this valley, about the dangerous men who followed such opportunities. His duty was to report her presence, nothing more. "Miss Green, you should know." A gunshot cracked through the valley, sending birds scattering from the trees. Julia dropped instinctively to the ground as Finn swung from his saddle, pulling his rifle free. "Inside, now," he commanded, scanning the tree line as 3 riders emerged from the forest. Their horses kicked up dust as they thundered toward the cabin. "Those are Harlow's men," Julia whispered, her face pale but composed. "They've been trying to force me off this land for months. They want the water rights." Finn recognized the lead rider, a notorious hired gun who worked for land speculators and cattle barons throughout the territory. This wasn't railroad business, but everything in him rebelled at the thought of leaving a woman alone against such men. "Get inside and bar the door," he said, positioning himself between Julia and the approaching riders. "I'll handle this." To his surprise, she didn't run. Instead, she straightened her spine and stood firmly beside him, a small derringer appearing in her hand. "This is my home, Mr. Young. I don't run from bullies." In that moment, as the riders approached and danger closed in, Finn felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. This woman's courage contradicted everything he believed about survival requiring isolation. Here she stood, facing down armed men to protect not just herself, but her home, her father's dream. The confrontation that followed was brief but tense. Finn's reputation as a marksman was evidently known to Harlow's men, who were less eager to fight when faced with determined resistance. They were treated with threats of return, promises that the woman couldn't be protected forever. As the dust settled and the riders disappeared into the distance, Julia turned to Finn with unwavering eyes. "You'll be wanting coffee, I expect. The least I can offer for your assistance." Inside the cabin, Finn discovered a world he'd forgotten could exist on the frontier. Despite its isolation, the small home radiated warmth. Shelves lined with books, a patchwork quilt on the bed in the corner, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and a small table set with simple but elegant pottery. Over coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, Julia explained her situation. Her father, a former schoolteacher from Boston, had brought her west after her mother died, seeking a fresh start. They'd found this valley 3 years ago, built the cabin together, and begun to create a life until pneumonia took him the previous winter. "The land claim is in my name," she said firmly. "Father insisted, but Harlow doesn't believe a woman can or should own property. He's offered to buy it for 1/10 of its worth, and when I refused, the intimidation began." "Why stay?" Finn asked, genuinely perplexed. "There's safer places." Julia's gaze drifted to the window, where the mountains rose majestically against the sky. "This valley has the richest soil I've ever worked. The stream never runs dry. The winters are milder than the open plains." She turned back to him. "But mostly, it's because running would mean they win. That force matters more than right. I can't accept that world." Finn left that evening with reluctance, promising to return after reporting to the survey team. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking about someone else's welfare. Julia's determined stand stirred something he'd thought long dead: respect, admiration, and a nagging sense that his philosophy of isolation might be flawed. Over the following weeks, as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Finn found reasons to visit the green homestead. He helped repair the corral, split firewood for the coming winter, and brought supplies from the nearest town 60 miles away. Each visit revealed new depths to Julia: her knowledge of plants, her skill with figures, her quick wit, and most surprising of all, her absolute refusal to see the frontier as a place of mere survival. "Look around you," she said one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset light the valley in gold. "Is this not worth fighting for? Worth loving?" Finn remained silent, but the walls he'd built around himself were crumbling. Julia's presence in his life had become a contradiction he couldn't resolve, proof that connection didn't always end in loss, that beauty could flourish even in harsh places. The survey team completed their work and moved on, but Finn remained, taking odd jobs that kept him near the valley. He built a small cabin a short ride from Julia's, telling himself he stayed to protect her from Harlow's men, who continued their campaign of intimidation. But in truth, he found himself drawn to her strength, her stubborn hope, her ability to create beauty in wilderness. During the long winter months, when snow isolated the valley from the outside world, they weathered the season together. Finn hunted game while Julia maintained the homestead. Evenings were spent by firelight, with Julia reading aloud from her books while Finn carved wooden figures, a skill he hadn't practiced since childhood. "You don't have to be alone to survive out here," Julia said one night, after he'd shared more of his past than he'd ever told another soul. "Maybe we survive better together." Spring came late to the mountains, and with it, escalating trouble. Harlow's men returned in greater numbers, destroying part of the garden, poisoning the well, and leaving threatening messages. The railroad had approved the route through the valley, bringing the promise of both civilization and conflict closer. One evening, as Julia and Finn rode back from checking fence lines, they found a railroad company man waiting at her cabin. Dressed in an expensive Eastern suit, Harold Whitmore looked out of place against the rustic backdrop. "Miss Green," he said with exaggerated patience, "I'm authorized to offer you fair market value for this property. The Northern Pacific will require this entire valley for the rail line and the station that will service it." Julia dismounted slowly. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Whitmore. My claim is legally filed and recognized by the territorial government." The man's expression hardened. "Perhaps I haven't made myself clear. This isn't a request. The railroad has been granted right-of-way by federal charter." Finn stepped forward, but Julia placed a hand on his arm. "Show me the legal documents stating your right to my specific property, sir. Until then, you're trespassing." After Whitmore left with thinly veiled threats about eminent domain, Finn paced the cabin like a caged wolf. "You should sell, Julia. Take the money and start somewhere new." "Is that what you believe?" she challenged, her eyes flashing. "That we should surrender to threats? That nothing is worth fighting for? I believe in surviving," he shouted, his composure finally breaking. "And I can't watch you die for a piece of land." The words hung between them, revealing more than he'd intended. Julia's expression softened as she moved to stand before him. "Is that what haunts you, Finn? That caring for someone means watching them die?" She placed her hand against his cheek. "You've lost so much that you stopped allowing yourself to want anything that could be taken away." Her perception cut through him like a knife, exposing the fear that had driven him for years. Before he could respond, she continued, "But that's not living, Finn. That's just avoiding death." That night, as a spring storm lashed the mountains, something fundamental shifted between them. Under the pelting rain on the cabin roof, Finn surrendered the walls he'd built. Their first kiss tasted of wood smoke and coffee, of years of loneliness finally broken. In Julia's arms, he found a different kind of safety than he'd sought through isolation, the security of being truly known and accepted. By morning, Finn knew he couldn't lose her, couldn't return to the emptiness of his former life. "I'll help you fight for this land," he promised as dawn broke over the mountains. "Whatever it takes." But the fight proved more dangerous than either anticipated. Barely a week later, returning from town with supplies, Finn found the cabin in flames. Julia was nowhere to be found, but a note nailed to a tree made the situation clear. "The woman is with us. Land deed for her life. Harlow." Cold fury replaced the panic in Finn's chest. This was exactly why he'd avoided attachments. They became weapons against you. Yet even as this thought formed, he recognized its hollowness. Having Julia in his life, however briefly, had been worth any risk. Now he would prove it. Tracking Harlow's men to their camp took every skill Finn had developed in his years on the frontier. They'd taken her to an abandoned mining camp in the foothills, a place easily defended and difficult to approach. Through his spyglass, Finn counted 6 men, heavily armed, with Julia held in a small shack under guard. For the first time, Finn found himself praying. Not for his own survival, that had never concerned him much, but for Julia's. For a chance to tell her what he'd realized too late, that she had taught him what truly mattered in the harsh landscape of the West. Not just enduring, but living. Not just surviving, but building something worth protecting. Under cover of darkness, Finn infiltrated the camp. Years of moving silently through hostile territory served him well as he disabled 2 guards without raising an alarm. But as he approached the shack where Julia was held, a sentry spotted him. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night's stillness. Diving for cover, Finn returned fire, aware that surprise was lost and time was running out. Through the chaos, he heard Julia's voice from inside the shack, not crying in fear, but shouting warnings to him about the positions of Harlow's men. Even captive, she was fighting. Even in danger, she thought of him. A bullet grazed his arm as he made a desperate dash for the shack. Kicking in the door, he found Julia already working to free herself, having loosened the ropes binding her to a chair. "Took you long enough," she said with a relieved smile that belied the bruise darkening her cheek. Had to make sure you missed me properly, he replied, cutting through her remaining bonds. Their escape was nearly cut short when Harlow himself emerged from the main cabin, rifle raised. Should have known you'd come for her, Young, the land speculator called. Always had more sentiment than sense. And you've always underestimated what people will do for what matters, Finn answered, positioning himself in front of Julia. What followed was a standoff that would later become legend in the territory, one man protecting what he loved against overwhelming odds. It ended with Harlow wounded, his men scattered, and Finn and Julia making their escape into the night-shrouded mountains. By dawn, they'd reached a ranger station where the territorial marshal happened to be passing through. Finn's reputation and Julia's composed testimony were enough to dispatch a posse to arrest Harlow and his men for kidnapping and attempted murder. But their troubles weren't over. While Julia recovered at the ranger station, news arrived that Whitmore had filed legal papers challenging her land claim, citing improper registration and alleging that a woman couldn't legally maintain a homestead without a male relative or husband. It's not true, Julia insisted weakly from her bed. Father made certain everything was filed correctly. Even if it was, the marshal said gently, the courts have been ruling against single women in homestead disputes. The railroad has powerful friends in the territorial government. Finn paced the small room, his mind racing. Everything he'd feared about attachment seemed to be coming true. Loving someone meant watching them lose everything they cared about. Yet in his heart, a new certainty had formed. If Julia lost her land, they would find another place. What mattered was that they faced it together. "Marry me," he said suddenly, turning to her. Julia's eyes widened. "Finn, I won't have you propose just to save my land claim." "I'm not," he said, kneeling beside her bed and taking her hand. "I'm proposing because nearly losing you made me realize I've been wrong about everything. The frontier isn't just a place to survive. It's a place to build something worth living for. And I want to build that life with you, wherever it might be." Tears welled in Julia's eyes. "Are you certain? You've spent so long believing that caring for someone is a weakness." "I was wrong," Finn said simply. "Loving you has made me stronger than I ever was alone." Their wedding took place 3 days later in the ranger station, with the marshal officiating and 2 rangers as witnesses. Julia wore her blue calico dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Finn wore the only clean shirt he owned. It wasn't the ceremony either might have imagined, but as they spoke their vows, the simplicity seemed fitting for a love born in the wilderness. The legal battle for Green Valley continued through the summer. As Julia's husband, Finn could now represent her interests in territorial court, facing down Whitmore and the railroad's attorneys. The case drew attention throughout Montana Territory as a test of individual rights against corporate power. In a surprising turn, their cause found an unexpected ally in Senator James Burton, who had arrived to inspect the railroad's progress. Upon hearing their story and visiting the valley himself, he recognized the potential importance of the case to settlers throughout the Western Territories. "The frontier cannot be built by corporations alone," he declared in court. "It will be settled by people like the Youngs, who see not just land to exploit, but homes to build and futures to forge." The court's ruling came as autumn once again painted the mountains in gold and crimson. The Green Young homestead claim was valid, but the railroad would have right-of-way through a portion of the valley. It was a compromise that recognized both progress and individual rights. As they rode back to their valley, Julia leaned against Finn's chest, his arms secure around her. "We'll need to build a new cabin farther from the tracks," she mused. "The garden will have to be relocated too. We can build something better," Finn replied, surprising himself with his optimism. "Maybe even a proper house, with glass windows." Julia turned to look up at him, her face radiant in the autumn light. "You've changed, Finnegan Young." He smiled, no longer fighting the warmth that filled him whenever she was near. "I found something worth changing for." 1 year later, as the first snow dusted the peaks surrounding Green Valley, Finn stood on the porch of their new 2-story home. The railroad had indeed come through, bringing both challenges and opportunities. The small station built at the valley's edge had created a market for Julia's vegetables, and the furniture Finn had discovered a talent for crafting. Inside, Julia moved around their kitchen, her rounded belly evidence of the child that would arrive before spring. The home they'd built together was filled with a warmth Finn had never imagined possible in the harsh Montana territory. Shelves of books, handcrafted furniture, curtains at real glass windows, and most importantly, the presence of someone who made each day worth living. As Julia joined him on the porch, slipping her hand into his, Finn reflected on how thoroughly his beliefs had been transformed. The frontier wasn't just a place of danger and loss. It was also a place of creation, of possibility, a place where love could not just survive but flourish if one found the courage to risk it. "Look," Julia whispered, pointing to where the sunset painted the snow-capped mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Is there anywhere more beautiful in all the world?" Finn looked down at her upturned face, at the woman who had taught him that the greatest risk in life wasn't losing what you loved, but never loving at all. "No," he answered truthfully, drawing her close against the evening chill. "There isn't.